Hello and welcome to the Services School Stories podcast. You'll hear from veterans and partners who'll share their stories and insights about how you can use higher education to transition from the military and achieve your goals. Now let's get going. All right, welcome to the podcast. Today we have Desaree Edwards. Desaree is a fellow Submariner. She served as a nuclear mechanic on the USS Florida, after which she went to Wesleyan University in Connecticut and was admitted to Yale Law School, which is quite impressive. In addition to her educational background, she received several prestigious scholarships, including the Tillman Scholarship and the Truman Scholarships. Desaree, it's great to have you on the podcast. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself? Where did you come from and what drove you to join the military?
Thanks so much, Alec. I'm excited to be here today. I'm originally from Mississippi. I kind of grew up, had a low-income background, and I joined the military because I didn't really see a lot of options where I was living at the time. And I took the ASVAB by accident, actually. They had it at my school. I didn't quite know what it was, but I knew at the time that I didn't want to write the essay about Macbeth that I was going to have to write. So I took the ASVAB with my friend and did pretty well on it and got a bunch of calls from recruiters, and I saw it as a viable pathway for me, so I joined the Navy. I did my first 2 years in training in South Carolina and then stayed on to teach at that same school for 2 more years and then went to my boat for the 4 years following that. About a year before I was set to get out of the military, I had a pretty catastrophic knee injury. And that gave me an opportunity to kind of separate myself from the day-to-day work of being on a submarine. And I had the time to explore kind of what my options were for transitioning out and what I wanted to do. Yeah.
Okay, wow. So there's a few things to unpack there. All right, so first off, we all know that the Navy is the best, and that within the Navy, the submarines are without question the best part of the Navy. But just out of curiosity, what intrigued you about the Navy? You said you got calls from a bunch of different branches. Like, what made you pick the Navy? And then within the Navy, what drove you to the submarine force?
So I didn't have a cell phone at the time. I had put my mom's phone number down, and she would answer the phone and she would just ask, like, Des, do you want to join the Marines? I'm like, no, I don't think so. Des, do you want to join the Army? I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. But the Navy recruiter actually started talking to her about the nuclear program. And my mom, was just like, hey, this program sounds like it could be, pretty good for you. And also there's a bonus and there's a lot of educational opportunities. So that's kind of what convinced me to join the Navy. Was I found a program that I thought I would be a good fit for. And then while in that program, going through the school, the pipeline that we had, I found that I really respected the submarine sailors that I worked with. I felt like they focused more on getting the job done correctly and the technical competence as opposed to what you looked like or whether or not you were a woman. Like, I was held to the same standard. And so was everyone else. And I really valued that level of technical competence and wanted to be a part of that. And fortunately, I was going through, kind of doing that. It was like 2015 when they started integrating enlisted nukes into the submarine force. So I hit the right time period and applied for the program and did all of my interviews and got selected for submarine service.
Very cool. So when you enlisted as just a general nuke, and then while you were at, was it Power School, Prototype? And sorry, just quick backup for the listeners because Desaree and I are both Submariners, so we got to talk the same language. But Desaree, would you mind giving the listeners like a quick summary of what nuclear submarine training looks like?
Yeah, so you start off in what's an A school, essentially. So I was a mechanic, so they're teaching you how to do, here's a hammer, here's how to do basic math, that kind of stuff. After that, it was just about 3 months for mechanics, and then there's electricians and electronics technicians who go to a 6-month A school where they learn about electricity and wires, electricity stuff. And then after that, you go to Power School, which is a 6-month training on reactor theory, fluid dynamics, heat transfer and fluid flow. You're really learning the background of a reactor, kind of what's going on from a theoretical perspective. After that, you go to a 6-month prototype, which is on an operating reactor plant. And for me, it was in Charleston, so there were 2 submarines that were pierside at the base there. And you learn how to stand watch, you learn how to operate, start up, and shut down the reactor. After you do that, some sailors have the opportunity to stay on at prototype for 2 years to teach other students. And so that is what I did. I did my 2 years of training, and then I stayed at the prototype for 2 years, kind of teaching that hands-on aspect of reactor and propulsion plant operations.
Gotcha. And that's the junior staff instructor program.
Yes.
Yeah, and so just to put it in perspective for the listeners, that's about a year and a half of schooling you have to go through before you get to your first ship. So, at what point in that process did you decide to go subs?
So I didn't realize, I think probably within the first few months, the person that was in charge of my division, kind of like right when you show up to training, was a submariner, and I'm like, oh, that's what I want to do. But it didn't become a reality or a potential reality for me until I was serving as a staff instructor, and that's when they opened up the billets. I'm like, okay, this is actually something that I can do.
Cool. Good stuff. And so for you, was it the opportunity to do something groundbreaking? You wanted to, or it was more so just the quality of the crew? Because, and then sorry for the listeners, as a nuke, you can go and work on an aircraft carrier or on a submarine. And so it's kind of your own choice. And one of them is slightly harder than the other, in my humble opinion. So Desaree went for the harder option. I'm just curious what drove you to that one.
So right off the bat, kind of just like the more shallow things, I was told the food was better. The crew is much smaller, so you're not dealing with 5,000 people, kind of just like around you all of the time. And there's air conditioning on submarines, which was air conditioning in the engine room was a huge plus for me. But more deeply, it was that I had this opportunity to do something. I was the first nuke that they sent, that they integrated on the East Coast, enlisted wise, and they had officers there for a few years, but my department had never had a woman. And I felt like I was a good candidate for that because I had a great deal of experience. At that point, I'd been in the military for 4 years. I was, serving as a sexual assault victim advocate. I kind of had that, that was one of the big concerns with integration, was that you're going to have issues with integrating in that way. And I felt like I was a good candidate because I was technically very competent at my job. I was in the Navy for 4 years at that point. I had been around submarine sailors and knew that they were the type of people that I wanted to emulate and be like. And so when the opportunity came, it was just a natural progression for what I wanted to do.
Very cool. I agree with all that. Submarines are indeed the best. So yeah, I was on subs before Desiree's time. I was it was 2007 to 2010 timeframe. So they had just announced the integration as I was leaving the submarine. And so there's 3 different types of submarines. And Desaree, would you mind jumping in on that discussion and talking about the type of submarine you served on, and really like what kind of missions you all did at a high level, and like what the rotation was like? You shared a little bit about before the call about some of the places you'd been and how you worked that.
So I was on a guided missile submarine, which originally was a ballistic missile submarine that they converted to carry a different type of missile that was non-nuclear, like a non-nuclear warhead. And when they did that, they also fitted it to have, for the integration. Our cycle was, there were 2 crews, and so you would go out on deployment for 4 to 6 months, and then bring the ship would, I'd stay forward deployed, and you would take the crew to the ship, or you would bring the ship back stateside and the other crew would take over. And in between every instance of deployments, you had maintenance that had to happen at various levels. So for me specifically, I was forward deployed to Diego Garcia, and that was my first deployment, and our ship broke. We had a major diesel issue on the island. Diego Garcia is a 32-mile wide island on the Indian Ocean. It's part of British Indian Ocean territory. and it is very small. There's actually like 4 bars for some reason, and then a store, and that's about it. It's a very small island, and we were there for way too long. We were there for, I want to say, about 4 months, most of my first deployment, without going out more than, a little bit at a time under the water. Second deployment, I was half forward deployed to Diego, and then we transferred through the Suez to the Mediterranean, and we stopped into Crete. And then stopping to do maintenance is really just kind of how it works. And then my third deployment, I spent all of that in the Med. We stopped in Crete, and then we also stopped in Gibraltar. So the cycle is you spend 4 to 6 months out, and then you swap over crews, usually wherever you're ported, like forward deployed, and then you fly back home, and you have 4 to 6 months while the other crew's out.
Gotcha. And so you spent about 6 months, give or take, in Diego Garcia, and then flew back to Kings Bay, Georgia. And then when you're in Kings Bay, when you're an off crew, what kind of stuff did you all do?
You're doing a lot of training. So there's mock-ups of the power plant, the propulsion plant, control systems in Kings Bay. So you're doing a lot of operational training. You're qualifying, so you're spending a lot of time studying to prepare for future qualifications. I qualified, senior in rate my first deployment, and then the second and third ones I was working and finishing up my engineering watch supervisor quals, which is the kind of the most senior enlisted position in the engine room. And you're also doing a lot of training for the junior sailors. So for the nuclear program, you take monthly exams, and you have training every week. And so you do training every week, and then you take an exam on the training that you've gotten, because you have a kind of continuing education requirement.
So here's the thing. I don't think like a lot of our listeners even know what it means to qualify, because not every branch of the military has to qualify stuff. So tell us like what it means to qualify as like a nuclear mechanic, like what you have to do to get that qualification.
Yeah. So basically, there are different watch stations on the submarine that have different, responsibilities. And you have to be able to individually stand that watch and operate that equipment. And in order to do that, you have to be trained and not only know kind of the theory behind that equipment, but also operationally how it works. So qualifications consist of you go to a watch station, you're going to stand practice watches with someone who's standing watch at that time. And then you're also going to do what are called checkouts, which is knowledge checks that you do with someone that's already qualified, where you show like you're drawing systems diagrams for every system, and you are, showing that you have the knowledge about this is how this fluid system works, and these are the special components, these are the characteristics for that system. And following that, you have the kind of hands-on, and you do that for every single watch station. And then you have qualifications that are for the entirety of the engine room. So you have kind of just this building block of knowledge that by the time you're finished, you have this holistic understanding of the theory and operations for the entire engine room. And interesting for submarines is that you qualify, for getting your submarine qualifications, you have to show that level of knowledge, maybe not to the same extent as your specific job, but for the entire ship. And that's important because, casualty control, or when there's an emergency on a submarine, requires an all hands approach, and you need everyone to understand how a submarine works and the specifics of it to make sure that you stay safe and go home.
Yeah, that's the big thing, that you have to know a little bit about everything, because like if there's, when we talk about casualties, like if there's a fire or something like that, you have to know how to be able to put it out. You have to know how to take the correct actions. And at a basic level, if you're the person in a place when something goes wrong, you have to know how to essentially be like, a first responder until the person who's the expert gets there. Yeah, and basically, so as a nuclear mechanic, you essentially, correct me if I'm wrong, but you basically had to be able to draw the entire ship's engine room propulsion system, like all the pipes, all the circuitry, everything like that, front to back, to be able to qualify your position.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. I would say maybe not every single circuit on the ship, but certainly the major ones, and know where all of the major components are so that you can respond during casualty and know how to, operate day to day. It's a an aggressive training setup, and not only do you do that when you initially qualify, but you have to maintain that throughout your entire time in the program.
Yeah, you're talking about those monthly exams. Those are a nightmare. It just brought back some memories. Like, oh, I hated those. And the thing is, and tell me what you think about this. So I had an observation that the way Marines are about physical fitness, nukes are about knowledge. And so, like, when you talk about going to like a checkout and you have to demonstrate knowledge again, brought back some bad memories. But if you're like the new person, it's like, hey, I want to go for a run with a Marine. That Marine's gonna like, and you're the new person, that Marine's gonna try to outrun you and make sure that they're in much better shape than you are, or have you do pull-ups until your arms fall off. And that's kind of like the same type of attitude a nuke takes with knowledge and like making you draw a system. Would you agree with that, or what was your experience?
I completely agree. You show up to the boat and it's like right off the bat, the standard is just like you should already know this. Even though everyone knows you aren't supposed to already know this. You hit the ground running and the expectations are high just right off the bat. And for a good reason, like there's never enough people to do the work that exists. And every second that someone's, not qualified, you have someone else that's taking on that workload. It can create some weird cultural dynamics that maybe we'll get into a little bit later, but it's intense.
Yeah, cool. Well, good stuff. It just bringing back so many memories. So not all of them good, but anyways, all right. So Desiree, so we'll get there. So you've mastered nuclear engineering, and you've spent your time on the ship. Can you talk us through a little bit about the process that made you decide that you wanted to get out, find other things, and then how you went through your school selection and ended up choosing Wesleyan?
So, yeah, why did I get out of the military? I remember kind of when I made the decision that I wanted to go on a submarine. I had this idea that I was going to go to a submarine, that it wasn't going to matter that I was a woman, that I was just going to be able to do my job and excel and work with my shipmates, and that we were just going to, like integrate and everything was going to be hunky dory. But my first deployment, there was this large scale sexual harassment event that happened on my ship. And it made the Times or the Navy Times, not the New York Times, the Navy Times at the time. This was 2018, because it was the initial integration and kind of the first deployment on the East Coast for having female sailors on a submarine enlisted. And we had this event happen when we were in Diego, and we had a failure of our leadership. Ultimately, our captain, our XO, and our senior enlisted leader, so the comm, the chief of the boat, were all removed from command because of what happened. And I was, kind of in the center of this event that happened, and I saw really a failure on a variety of sides. So everyone that if you're in the military, you have systems that are set up to protect people from when they get, when they face, sexual assault, sexual harassment, discrimination. And if those systems work, it provides, some help for the person that's experiencing this, some punishment for the person that's done it. The systems are designed to protect you and allow you to keep doing your job while dealing with this situation. We had a complete failure of our systems from bottom to top. And ultimately, it felt like the captain was trying to cover up what happened. And so you have this submarine where, cohesion is integral to the mission. You have to be able to trust the people around you. And we didn't trust each other. And there was this level of institutional betrayal that made not only the working environment difficult. It's already difficult. It's already a difficult working environment. And now you have these personnel aspects to it that's making it untenable. And I realized in that moment, I had been serving as a victim advocate for 4 years. And I realized in that space that I couldn't make the difference that I felt very passionate about. We had I want to say it was, probably 5 female sailors that got out of the military in that instance because of what happened. Over 33 years of experience. And I forget, I want to say it was like $3 million in training costs when I calculated kind of how much it would have cost to train those sailors. And we lost that because of the failure of our systems and our leadership to stand up against what had happened on our ship. And I felt a deep sense of loss for that because it shattered my viewpoint of what being on a submarine was going to be like. And it made me realize, like, in that moment, I felt like it doesn't matter that I'm working just as hard as everyone else. It doesn't matter that I've, put all of this effort and time into, showing up for my shipmates and being the best that I can be, because ultimately I'm being, just kind of pushed in this box of, like, I'm a woman and that's all that matters. And so I realized at that point that I wanted to do something else, that I didn't want to stay in this program for the entirety of my career. And I needed to figure out what that passion, where the direction for that passion was going to go. I completed my contract, so I had, it was like 3 or 4 years at that point on my re-enlistment contract. And then that's, when I had that knee injury, it really gave me an opportunity to take some time for myself and decide, what am I going to be doing? I think, when you're caught up in the day-to-day operations of your job, it is really difficult to take a step back and think, who am I? And what do I enjoy doing? And what am I passionate about? What do I care about? You are, sometimes just like barely making it day to day when the workload is so heavy that you don't have the opportunity to self-reflect. So, I often say, like, the catastrophic knee injury that I had was one of the best things that happened to me because it gave me an opportunity to step back and think about those types of things. I got removed from my ship because if you have a knee injury that you can't walk, much less climb down a ladder. And I ended up working in a JAG's office, so a Judge Advocate General, which is a lawyer for the Navy. And I was working on, a variety of cases. I was the only person helping this JAG, so I was really integrated into the office, even though I don't have a legal background. It was a really unique experience, and it really set me up for kind of, my ultimate decision to go to law school. And so that was a lot. But as far as my decision to go to Wesleyan, I had the opportunity to think about what my pivot points are. Just spent a lot of time looking up resources, and I found Service to School. I got connected with my Service to School ambassador, who interestingly had the same job as me, was also a Submariner, was also a nuke, and I got to talk to someone who was on the other side of their undergraduate education. And he told me, he was like, don't sleep on taking the entirety of the 4 years of your college, taking all of that time to figure out what you want to do. If you're getting paid to go to school, you should, take that opportunity and actually invest and reflect on, kind of what you're interested in. And then he told me not to sleep on a liberal arts education. And so I remember the word, I can't remember exactly the words he used, but he was like, I think there's a school that's like 30 minutes away from where you're moving. And I ended up looking it up, and I found Wesleyan. I literally Googled universities near me, and Wesleyan popped up, and they had a admissions program that was specific for veterans. And by the December before I was separating from the military, I knew that I was going to be going to Wesleyan.
Very cool. All right, so a couple questions here. One of them is, because what you said touched a chord a little bit with me earlier about, the element of trust. And when you're on a ship underwater, the motto is everybody comes home or nobody goes home. So you really have to trust each other. And for me personally, I had not nearly obviously the extent that you did, but I had some good leaders and I had some bad leaders. And I honestly felt that I learned more from the negative leaders than I did from the good ones, because I learned about the type of person I didn't want to be. From your submarine experience, what takeaways do you have about how you wanted to lead and manage people going forward? Like, from that negative experience you had, how did you seek to turn it into a positive for your personal leadership style?
I think the first aspect that I realized, and I had the opportunity later on at at the end of my tour to serve as the leading petty officer for my division, which was an incredible leadership experience for me. But one of the things that I tried to focus on was putting the people first. I think the setup and depending on where you're at in the service, you have to kind of navigate the balance between completing the mission and taking care of the people that are serving under you. I felt like in my position, I could focus more of that balance on making sure that the people that I was working with were doing okay and that they had what they needed to succeed, because there were a slew of people who were focused and concerned about the mission. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't, push getting work done, or I wasn't, progressing or making sure that we were being productive. But I realized that when you stop thinking about the people and you only think about the mission, that's when you have instances like what happened on my ship. And then what happens is you get this sense of institutional betrayal where, the people that are working for you don't feel like the system has its best interest. And once that trust is broken, it's very difficult to have people who are invested in getting the mission accomplished. If you don't think that support and trust goes both ways, you're not going to have the most productive team that you can. And so I wanted to do my best to repair that, because in my instance, it wasn't just, the female sailors that lost the trust in the command. It was also the male sailors. Not everyone was involved in what happened, and they felt like, what happened was not representative of who they were and what they wanted for their time in service. And there was a lot of just, this discontent because of the failure of our leadership. And so I sought to repair that. I sought to make sure that, if something happened, that I was focused on making sure that person was okay. We had, when you're deploying, there's stuff's coming up, people are going through major life crises, and it's really important to make sure that people feel seen. This is a silly example, but I started doing Secret Santa Christmas presents while deployed. So before you left on deployment, you got your Secret Santa's gift and you brought it with them to give them while they're on deployment. And I remember I reached out to the person that was who I was their Secret Santa. I reached out to their family before deployment. Now I knew that they were close to their family. I just, I knew the sailor, and I got pictures and letters from family members. And in the middle of deployment, when they were standing watch on Christmas, I got an opportunity to give them this piece from home. And I really think, the idea to be loved is to be seen, and to see that you can show that you care about the people that are working with you by seeing them as people as opposed to just a cog in the machine. And I know that's kind of a simple tenable aspect of leadership, but I think for me it was a really important one.
Yeah, and so it's sometimes and I agree with that entirely, the simplest pieces of advice, or the simplest ways to be, are the most effective. And there's that point about just caring. When I showed up to the ship, I you talk about people who struggle with knowing all that stuff. I was an English major as an undergrad, trying to make it as a nuclear officer, and I was like, well, the only way I can survive here is if I just really care about everybody and they see that, because there's no way I'm going to be able to do that on my knowledge of nuclear power. And so it worked. And I did okay. So I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying. And then to just switch gears slightly to your college experience. So you went through basically what I think amounts to higher than a bachelor's degree level. I mean, almost a master's degree level of understanding of nuclear engineering. And you went to Wesleyan for liberal arts. What drove you to essentially do a 180 on your military training? And then what made you choose the course of study that you chose?
It wasn't quite a 180 at the beginning. So Wesleyan has an engineering program, and my initial kind of I'm going to go to this school was that I was going to major in engineering, and that I was going to go that pathway. What was good about that decision was that there were other options and I could branch out, because I took my first kind of design and engineering class and I absolutely hated it. I could not stand it. It was awful. I was not having fun. And so that's kind of when I realized that my initial plan of I'm going to go from this engineering field to this engineering degree was not for me. But I took a wide variety of classes. I wanted to just kind of see what was out there. And I think knowing what you don't want to do is sometimes just as valuable as knowing what you do want to do. And so I took a neuroscience class, and I fell in love with it. And knowing that I ultimately wanted to work in kind of the like advocacy space, it fit nicely with the concept of understanding the neurobiological effects of trauma and how that affects the brain. And it was also very fun. And so I just ended up taking a class and falling in love with the subject, and it fit with, kind of ultimately, how I saw myself in the world. And yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. So you're a neuroscience major then.
Yes. And I'm working on my human rights advocacy minor as well.
Very cool. Very cool. And one of the other things I'd like to hear then is your experience about being a female veteran on campus, because being a veteran on campus, you're one of a very, very few, but veterans, by and large are male. And so it's like a little bit easier to find a community of, I guess like-minded people, because you're a bunch of guys can hang out and talk about similar things. As a female veteran, how did you really find your home on campus and build relationships with your classmates and your fellow veterans at Wesleyan?
One of the very, lucky for me aspects of Wesleyan is that they do a cohort model for veterans admissions. So you're going in with kind of this cohort of people who have been in the military before. And so right off the bat, you're kind of building this community. We had, it's changed now, but essentially a week before school starts where you meet your cohort, you get to know one another, you learn about the resources that are available to you. And so there's just this kind of immediate, camaraderie building. Not everyone in the military has the same experiences. They're not always going to get along, but it does kind of give you a stepping stone space for you to kind of integrate yourself into the university culture at large. And so I was very lucky. My cohort was excited to be there. No one was kind of, I don't want to say like holding on to that veteran identity, because I think that that's important, but they were allowing themselves to be seen and to like work towards being something beyond a veteran, which meant that they were open to new experiences. They weren't just like holding on to what they did in the past. They were allowing themselves to like try new opportunities and see what they would be interested in. And so we had a really good group, and it was kind of like instant friends with some, and some people, maybe not as close to. And then the first year, the way my school works is you kind of once a week, you meet with your cohort, and you have a mentor who's, there to help answer any questions, to help you with any issues. And then you kind of gradually step out of that. And this past year, actually, this fall semester, we opened up Wesleyan's first Veterans Center. And so now we have this space to go. It's been very exciting. And so the combination between the cohort model and having your own center to where you can connect gives you plenty of opportunity to connect with other veterans if that's something that you need. But I've noticed that as people kind of get out of their first and second years, they start integrating themselves into the larger culture. I have, friends that are in neuroscience majors. The human rights advocacy program at my school is so unique, and it's this entire group of people who have the similar interests to me. And so I see veterans on campus. We have lunch every 2 weeks probably, but I'm integrating myself further into the college campus. And I think having that natural progression, that step-by-step progression, gives veterans an opportunity to like have a foot in both of those worlds.
Yeah, it's very cool. And then just quick pitch for Wesleyan. How many veterans are there on campus?
I want to say we're between 20 and 30, I think right now. Yeah. And so, but it's, generally a smaller campus, which I think has its own benefits. But yeah.
And gotcha. And so you did 4 years at Wesleyan then, the full 4?
I'm finishing this May, yes.
Very cool. And then, but you mentioned before that you don't live on campus. And what's been your experience commuting to campus? Because I know some veterans are in that position, are making the decision of whether or not they want to live on campus or live off campus.
It has its pros and cons. I appreciate kind of this separation between, school and home where, I'm not inundated. If there's a party next door, there's not. I don't live there, so I'm not, having to deal with the effects of living on a campus with, 3,000 other people. But the negative part of that is that, I'm not, having dinner with my classmates every evening. I wasn't joining sports teams or things that happened later in the evening because I was driving home. There's a give and take with that, but they're just essentially two sides of the same coin. And I think when you're deciding that, you'll have to think, do you want to be, an integrated part of this university, or do you want that separation? And then another important aspect to consider is that when you live on campus, if you are planning on doing an internship over the summer, you won't have to keep paying for housing at your school, as opposed to if you get an apartment where your lease is a year, you're still going to have to pay, obviously pay rent during the summer, which can influence your decision to do summer internships out of state and that kind of thing.
Gotcha, and that's a really good segue. So I'm very interested because you mentioned human rights, and then another thing you said struck a chord. It's crazy how different. We've had a similar military. We did the same thing in the military, and we've had similar events. And in my case, I was on medical hold. And when I was coming out of prototype, there was just like a thing in my medical record that I had to get a waiver for, had to wait a little bit for that. But I went to work for the command career counselor, and I was helping veterans with and the junior staff instructors with their STA 21, their officer applications. And I really got a lot of fulfillment out of that. And here I am, like almost 20 years later, now doing similar work here at Services School. So it's kind of cool that you went to work for the JAG, saw that passion, and then you parlayed that into doing human rights stuff. And so I'm pursuing a human rights track at Wesleyan. So I'm very interested to hear what got you into that, what type of opportunities there are at Wesleyan, and how you plan to use that going forward.
So for the human rights program, I almost didn't apply to it. I almost didn't because I didn't understand exactly what it was on campus. Like I saw a flyer, I'm like, but I had a friend 3 hours before the deadline to apply, email it to me. And they were like, you should apply for this. This was, this program was made for you. And so I applied and I got in. And the program is really unique. There's not an undergrad program like it anywhere else in the US. It's ran by an organization that has, human rights lawyers, and you do supervised fact finding in areas that are experiencing human rights abuses, and then you write reports on that and then submit them. I'll give you an example. So for me, I traveled in March of 2023 to Armenia with a human rights lawyer to conduct a fact finding of human rights abuses that were occurring in the border regions of Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. And these human rights abuses were being perpetrated by Azerbaijan, which is the country that's right next to them. And so over the course of 12 days, we conducted 58 interviews with people who had experienced a variety of human rights abuses, forced displacement, torture, like ethnic discrimination. They were being pushed from their homes. And it was so just like such a life-changing experience for me because I saw kind of the human rights corpus at work. Like how can you make a difference in this field? And at one point we were on one of the border regions of Armenia, and they took us to we were at a school. We were interviewing teachers who had been in this town during a drone attack. And they took us in the kindergarten classroom, which the Red Cross had actually converted into a bomb shelter. And so the students were learning in the bomb shelter that was, designed for the entire town. And along the walls, you had all of these posters trying to teach the children, like, hey, this is a landmine, don't pick this up if you see it. kind of just trying to like this harm reduction aspect of war. And so we conducted these interviews. I wrote my hands off trying to write down all of my notes. And then we converted that to a report that later that year was, delivered to the UN. And so another group of students got to go to the UN and be there for when this report was sent out. And the Armenia project with this human rights program on my campus is just one. They have a variety of opportunities. Some people did indigenous land rights in Argentina. People have done forced displacement in Mexico. People have done housing crisis in Connecticut, and they've worked in Cancer Valley in Louisiana. And so you have this opportunity to learn from experts in this field who are giving undergrads the like responsibility to take down these stories and to convert them into a larger scale impact. Which is unique and such an incredible program that I'm so grateful that I got the opportunity to be a part of. And ultimately, I realized while in that program that I wanted to work in the anti-trafficking field. My kind of like non-academic experiences were varied. So my first summer I interned at a law firm, and then the second summer I interned in DC, and I found myself kind of building up to this ultimate decision to wanting to work in the legal field and wanting to work in the anti-trafficking field. And just such an interesting through line.
That's fascinating. And then, so you decided to go to law school. Congrats on Yale, not too shabby. So for our potential law school applicants, would you mind sharing the process you went through to get into Yale? We're talking, how you looked at your different schools, how you prepared for your standardized tests, whether it was the LSAT or the GRE, the type of resources you used, and basically what ended up getting you where you are right now with grad school.
Cool. So I feel like I started preparing to go to law school freshman year. There's really two main, aspects of law school admissions. It's your GPA and your LSAT score. And you have these other factors. So how, the extracurriculars that you did, your experiences that are important, but kind of like the two things that you can start on, your GPA you can start on right at the beginning, but kind of the two biggest number aspects are the GPA and the LSAT. And so what I did was I started at the beginning just finding what I was interested in. I branched out, I tried different stuff. I invested in making sure that when I made the decision to go to law school, that it was something I was actually wanting to do long term, that it was something I was actually passionate about. The kind of like shorter term, how do you prepare applications and stuff? I went through Yale Law School's Launchpad Scholars program, which provides this holistic, application process, because you have the LSAT, which you have to study for. I mean, I had to study for at least. Some people, right off the bat, they're good to go. And then, applications, and it also provided funding. And so I started studying for the LSAT January of 24. I took it in August and September of 2024. And I started my applications, I would probably say spring. So writing my personal statement, that kind of stuff. And the Launchpad program offered, essay help. Here's how to like build this compelling story and this through line with your experiences. I applied to all of the schools that I wanted to apply to November 1st. Law school is actually very expensive to apply to. Maybe not as much as medical school is. And then I had my decision for Yale December 6th. So, it was, all that work for, essentially just like a month of anxiety.
Wow. And so how many law schools did you apply to?
I applied to 8.
Okay. We won't talk about the ones that you said no to. We don't want to publicly embarrass them, but that's a lot of work. And are the applications fairly similar, or is there I guess, can you recycle essays, or are those 8 unique applications?
I would say for the most part you can recycle essays. More importantly, you can recycle stories. So, at this point, I've applied to, scholarships and programs and, law school. And for me, it's like, I have the same story. The story doesn't change. And the passion doesn't change. The why am I doing this? What do I care about? It's all the same. And that's been probably the most beneficial thing for me because, I don't have to sit there and stress about what am I going to write for this, like, why do I want to go to law school personal statement, because I've already built kind of this through line of why I want to do that. And so you can recycle essays, but you do have to make sure that you answer the question specifically, because they do ask different questions. With the changes that are kind of coming in college admissions, this might change as far as like how they structure applications, but it was, standard.
Gotcha. And so, I'm sorry, it's been such a great conversation. I just realized I lost track of time. So we're coming up on time. So just two more quick questions. So, what's next at law school? What do you want to study? And really, what do you want to do with it? And that's giving you a chance to recycle some of your law school application stories.
Yeah, so in law school, well, maybe I'll start with my passion. So I'm interested in providing legal advocacy for adult survivors of human trafficking. Right now, most of our legislation is really centered around protecting children. And the programs that we have are designed, for this like quintessential trafficking, child victim of trafficking. And I want to expand access to resources for adult survivors, assistance. Oftentimes adult survivors are arrested for crimes committed during their trafficking experience. I'm interested in kind of working in that space. I think law school for me is going to be an opportunity to determine the actual pathway for me to go through with that. So I'm interested in, doing criminal law or human rights law. But I think overarchingly, I'm staying open. It's an incredible opportunity to access education. And it would be a disservice to me if I didn't take the opportunity to expand what I'm interested in and just kind of went in narrow-minded.
Gotcha. So you're gonna do the humanitarian stuff. You're not going to big law for the big money.
I mean, I'm going to keep my options open. I'm not going to say never, but I am extremely passionate about the work that I want to do. But I think coming from my background, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the importance of building wealth generationally. I come from a low income background and I have the opportunity to bring my family up. And I think, it's not my passion. I don't see it in my future, but I certainly, I won't knock it, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very, very important thing to look at. Because in my case, like when I went to business school, I was like, I want to do social impact work, and then I started looking at the salaries that were getting thrown to consultants and bankers, and so I definitely pivoted, we'll say, for a short period, but then through that process, I realized, what I was really passionate about, and then, did that little hiatus, made some money, and then went over here to services school. And so, no, we won't judge you if you go to big law for a little bit. So, with that, I understand entirely. So, we've come up on time, but I just want to turn it over to you for any last minute words of wisdom and inspiration for the listeners.
I think kind of my biggest piece of advice is to, not just get siloed into what you think is the right path for you, to really just take the opportunity to discover who you are outside of your service and what interests you. But also keeping in mind that a career is long term. It's not just like what you have to do in this moment. So if it's delayed or it's it's not, I'm going to do this and this and in this like very specific order, that's okay. You have an entire life to live, and it can happen in really any order that you want to. And don't feel discouraged because you're 30 going into your undergrad. You have an entire life to really explore and take advantage of the educational opportunities that you have.
That's awesome. Desaree, thank you so much for your time. It's been fantastic talking to you.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
That's all we have for this episode. Join us next week, same time, same place, where we share more service to school stories. Service to School Stories is hosted by Sydney Mathis, Chief Program Officer, and Alec Emmert, Service to School CEO. Our podcast is produced and edited by our Director of Communication, Amanda Tobias. Service to School is a 501c3 nonprofit providing free college admission support to transitioning service members and veterans. Join us next week and follow us for more on your favorite social media platforms.